Hello and welcome to my art talk. Nice to see you here. I hope you enjoy it. As you know, or as you might not know, I've been delving into the world of fairy tales recently. Actually, since the beginning of this year, when the news became progressively worse and reading the Sunday papers became a bit of a trial because I kind of thought, oh, World War III is not that far away. And I know one of the things art can do is show you other worlds that you can dive into and wander around in, that open your eyes for other ways of being on the planet. And that's why I then felt very strongly I had to draw these fairy tale realms that I could see in my imagination. I'm also doing a course on exploring fairy tale and finding ourselves in fairy tales at the Pacifica Institute, led by Dr. Sharon Blackie, which is fascinating because, as you know, I've been studying art philosophy, which is what makes a work of art, for 10 years now. And her psychological approach, Sharon's approach, comes at it from a different angle, but they meet in the middle, because the meeting point is, of course, the essence of what makes us human. And why can we stand up against AI, of course? A very important topic today. And I recently gave a talk at the Pacifica Bee Time evening get-together, which I rushed through and probably overwhelmed everybody with far too much information. But I want to break it down into little pockets for you during this art talk series over the next couple of months, or weeks rather. But it was a lot of information. So art philosophy is what makes a work of art a work of art. What's the problem with that? Well, works of art aren't lying around on the street, are they? Philosophers seek to get wisdom about the planet. Where are we? How do we stand on it? How do we interact with it? What's the planet like? What's it doing to us? What are we doing to it? So on and so forth. Philosophy. It's there. It's given. Art philosophy. What makes a work of art a work of art? Well, where's the work of art? We need to make it first. And then we need to be able to discuss why. Is it a work of art or is it not a work of art? There are also very many parallels, I found out, between fairy tales and art, which is fascinating. But of course it is, because they're both essentially very human products. A fairy tale cannot be told twice in exactly the same way. By that I mean if you're orally telling a fairy tale from memory, not reading it from a book, obviously. I can't paint the same picture twice. A fairy tale will be interpreted differently by every listener. Everyone will hear something slightly different because everyone has got different experiences in their lives. The same thing applies to a work of art. A work of art will be interpreted differently by every viewer. That's why you have to leave a little bit of space in the work of art for the viewer to find themselves in it. We can use art and fairy tales to obtain wisdom about ourselves, our society, our lives. Both fairy tales and art, however, must be communicable. That means they must be able to communicate with the listener or the viewer. So, what is a work of art? I know I've answered this before, and I keep coming back to it because it's so important. And this knowledge is just so lost. Everybody studies art history. I go into countless galleries. I ask people, what do you know about art? They say, oh, I've got a degree in art history. I've got a master's in art history. But art history is not the same thing as art philosophy. It's interesting to know the context in which a picture was painted. Van Gogh painted his chair with the pipe on it, but without himself. He was feeling very low. He'd already painted himself out of the picture, so to speak. That's interpreting art. That's not necessarily the history of art. Not the same thing. It's very difficult to say what a work of art is. And so to help define this, to work through it, we need criteria. These criteria always point towards freedom. They're not rules, but open and free. They're not dogma. They're there to help. After all, It's no good if you have a car, but you don't know how to drive. If we remain in the purely subjective, which is what most people say, oh, art is just subjective. Yes, art is subjective. But if we remain in the purely subjective, we will remain alone with our opinion. I like it. I don't like it. That leads to loneliness. And it's something you hear again and again in the news today. People are lonely. Looking at art is a process of communication with the self, my subjective response, and communication with others. We've got to learn to communicate again. First, you have to ask yourself a question. Do I like it? That's my subjective response. The communication with myself. I learn about myself. The next question is to discuss the artwork with someone else that goes beyond the purely subjective. Here we need the criteria. This tool needs to point the way to freedom. It's not a set of rules, but open to interpretation, because looking at art is always about interpretation. This discussion that follows, thinking and questioning of your thoughts, your interpretations of the work you're looking at, and then you have the criteria that give you a framework and a tool for doing this. After all, a discussion is over very quickly if we each stand on our subjective viewpoint and say, I like it, I don't like it, end of story, right? And you have to come to a judgment by applying criteria and discussing them. The judgment is then no longer arbitrary, but universal based on these criteria. Judgment is subjective, but not entirely personal, and striving for a universal judgment is grounded in the individual feeling. So, without criteria to give us a framework for making a judgment, we remain not only lonely, but cannot make a judgment that stands up to discussion with others. We need to move from the subjective experience to the universal experience. Criteria give us a basis for discussion and decision making, in communication with others, in peace and freedom. I primarily use the criteria from Aesthetics in Art, was written down by Immanuel Kant, simply because they're the easiest to apply. However, I know a load of others that I add to them. I personally find it easier to say whether it's not a work of art. For me, if it's not made by a human, it's not a work of art. We're talking about the human state. We need to find out what makes us different from everything else. And that's why when we look at art, it's useful to have criteria, not as a set of rules, but a set of open questions that we can work through together in discussion. Not in it for an argument, for a discussion, by questioning each other and these rules, or not rules, these open questions. How should I say it? I don't even know how to express that properly. This open set list of things. Is the artwork open and free? Is it made by humans? Like I said before, can it communicate? Does it say something to you when you look at it? These are all criteria for judging art. And if we work through these criteria and discuss them with the others, you know them and I know them, then we can come to a universal judgment. And the next person who comes along, we can say, for us, this is work fulfills the criteria for a work of art, or it doesn't fulfill the criteria, and we can stand up to it. We can say, in discussion, we found out it does this, this, and this, and this. And that's why we came to this conclusion and made this judgment. We've interpreted the work. We've applied open and free points to it. So that's why it's so important to use criteria to make an open and free judgment. 2 weeks' time, I'll give you another art talk, and I'll compare art with fairy tales and go through the points, and you'll find how very similar they are. It's fascinating. If you want to learn more or meet me in person or come and paint in my garden, this summer I'm giving my summer school again from the 10th to the 12th of July. I'd love to see you there. 3 days of painting in the garden, inspired by nature. If you like this art talk, please drop a like, follow me, or leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.